Amy Bishop wasn't your typical university professor, and February 12, 2010 became the day that shattered any illusions about academic civility. This Harvard-trained neurobiologist had spent years climbing the academic ladder, but when the University of Alabama in Huntsville denied her tenure, something inside her snapped completely. Bishop had been an assistant professor in the biology department since 2003, researching nitric oxide resistance in the central nervous system and developing neural circuits on biological computer chips. Her colleagues knew her as intelligent but awkward, someone who'd openly complain about her tenure denial in meetings where it wasn't even relevant. What they didn't know was that Bishop had been carrying around violent secrets for decades. Before we dive deeper into these chilling cases, let's pause for a moment. If these stories are keeping you as captivated as they should be, smash that subscribe button right now and also comment from where are you watching today. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next because the story we're about to tell will make Amy Bishop's rampage look tame by comparison. The morning of the shooting started like any other day. Bishop taught her anatomy and neurosciences class, and students later said she seemed perfectly normal during the lecture. Nobody suspected that she'd already made her deadly decision. Around 4 in the afternoon, Bishop walked into a routine biology department faculty meeting on the 3rd floor of the Shelby Center for Science and Technology. 12 or 13 people attended what everyone described as an ordinary gathering. Bishop sat quietly for 30 to 40 minutes, appearing completely normal according to witnesses. Then everything changed in an instant. Bishop suddenly stood up, pulled out a Ruger P95 9mm handgun, and began executing her colleagues with chilling precision. A witness described the horror, saying Bishop got up suddenly, took out the gun, and started shooting at each person methodically. She started with the one closest to her and went down the row, shooting her targets in the head. This wasn't random violence, it was execution style. Those who were shot sat on one side of the oval table, while the 5 people on the other side dropped to the floor in terror. Biology department head Gopi Padala became her first victim, followed by Professors Maria Ragland Davis and Audrey L. Johnson. Bishop wounded 3 others before biochemistry professor Deborah Moriarty stepped up and saved everyone's lives. When Bishop pointed the gun at Moriarty and pulled the trigger, they heard only a click. The weapon had either jammed or run out of ammunition. Moriarty described Bishop as initially appearing angry, then perplexed when the gun failed. Associate Professor Joseph Ng watched as Moriarty approached Bishop, asking her to stop, and helped other survivors push Bishop from the room and block the door. The shooting wasn't really about tenure, though that's what everyone focused on afterward. Bishop's violent history stretched back decades. In 1986, she'd killed her 18-year-old brother Seth with a shotgun blast in their family home in Braintree, Massachusetts. Police initially ruled it an accident when 20-year-old Amy claimed she was learning to unload the weapon, but the case was reopened after the Alabama shooting. In 2002, Bishop was accused of assault after a fight with another customer at an international house of pancakes. Her research record was also questionable, with colleagues noting she'd published only 6 papers during her 6 years at UAH, far below the standard for tenure consideration. Bishop had been married to Jimmy Anderson, and they had 4 children together. Her husband described the tenure denial as a long, hard fight and said Bishop believed she exceeded the qualifications for tenure. She'd hired a lawyer who was finding problems with the process and even approached the University of Alabama System's Board of Trustees. The dispute partly centered on whether 2 of her papers had been published in time to count toward tenure. Bishop gave more weight to obtaining patents than publishing papers, but she'd received warnings that she needed more publications for tenure. Her colleagues knew Bishop was upset about the tenure denial, but nobody expected violence. William Setzer, chairman of the chemistry department, said Bishop was upfront about the issue, often bringing it up in meetings where the subject wasn't appropriate. An anonymous Harvard source had previously called Bishop's doctoral work a local scandal, saying her research was poor quality and undeserving of a degree. Her productivity at UAH was dismally low, publishing only 0.5 papers per year, far below average for tenure consideration. After the shooting, Bishop was charged with 1 count of capital murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Police found a large binder containing documents about her tenure battle, confiscated her computer, and held her without bail. She was eligible for either the death penalty or life in prison under Alabama law. Her lawyer initially planned an insanity defense, but Bishop eventually pleaded guilty to avoid execution. In September 2012, after a jury deliberated for just 20 minutes, Bishop was sentenced to life in prison without parole. She showed little emotion when the verdict was read, though lawyers said she'd expressed remorse to victims and their families. The case highlighted the intense pressure of academic tenure decisions and the devastating consequences when workplace grievances turn deadly. Jennifer San Marco's story is one of the deadliest workplace rampages in American history, and it started years before she ever pulled the trigger. This 44-year-old former postal worker had been spiraling for a long time, but nobody could predict just how far she'd fall. Born in Brooklyn, New York on December 6, 1961, San Marco bounced between jobs her entire adult life, never quite fitting in anywhere she went. She'd studied natural resources management at Rutgers University but never graduated, then moved to California in 1989 where she worked as a guard at Chuckawalla Valley State Prison in Blythe for almost her entire probationary period before quitting just 2 days before it ended. After leaving the prison job, San Marco worked as a dispatcher for the Santa Barbara Police Department in the mid-1990s, a position that required both background checks and psychological evaluations. She passed everything but left after just a few months, which wasn't unusual for such a stressful job. Then she worked serving lunch at a high school before quitting in 2000 and buying herself a condominium. Finally, she landed at the United States Postal Service as a mail processing clerk, where she'd work for 6 years until everything went completely sideways. San Marco's behavior at the postal facility grew increasingly bizarre over time. Co-workers described her as hostile, particularly toward Asian employees, and she'd often make racist comments that made everyone uncomfortable. In February 2001, police had to remove San Marco from the postal facility for strange behavior and placed her on a 72-hour involuntary mental health hold at Vista Del Mar Hospital in Ventura. She returned to work but was removed again in 2003 after an incident where she was found under a mail sorting machine and had to be wheeled out in handcuffs by police. After being placed on psychological disability leave in June 2003, San Marco moved to Grants, New Mexico, where she lived on disability checks while her mental state continued deteriorating. She kept a diary of more than 100 pages that meticulously tracked every perceived slight and offense from people around her. Investigators later said San Marco believed she was the victim of some massive postal service conspiracy, though she never left any suicide note or clear explanation for what she was planning. On the evening of January 30, 2006, San Marco drove back to California with murder on her mind. She started her rampage at her old condominium complex on Overpass Road in Santa Barbara, where she went to apartment 5400 and shot her former neighbor Beverly Graham in the head. Graham had apparently complained about San Marco's disruptive singing and yelling when they lived near each other. After killing Graham around 7:15 that evening, San Marco drove to the Goleta mail processing facility where she used to work. Around 9 o'clock that night, San Marco arrived at the massive 200,000-square-foot postal distribution center on Stork Drive. She followed another employee's vehicle so closely through the security gate that she didn't need a key card to enter the parking lot. Once inside, San Marco approached the building armed with a Smith & Wesson Model 915 9mm pistol and an extra magazine. She forced an employee at gunpoint to give her their security badge, then told them to leave unharmed. San Marco began her assault in the parking lot, shooting Zay Fairchild, a 37-year-old employee, in the head. She then shot 28-year-old Malika Higgins at close range, followed by 42-year-old Nicola Grant. Witnesses inside the building watched in horror from the windows as San Marco smiled at them during the shooting. Many employees fled to a nearby fire station for safety. Using the stolen badge, San Marco entered the building where about 80 night shift employees were working. The loud noise from mail sorting machines meant many workers wore ear protection and couldn't hear the gunshots, which allowed San Marco to move through the facility undetected. She immediately shot Supervisor Charlotte Colton, who was dragged to safety by a coworker but died 2 days later at Cottage Hospital from her injuries. San Marco then made her way to her former workstation, where she encountered 52-year-old Guadalupe Swartz, who tried to run but was shot and killed. Next, she found 57-year-old Dexter Shannon, a Vietnam War veteran who was wearing headphones and had no idea what was happening. San Marco shot Shannon fatally at close range. Witnesses saw her reload at least once during the rampage, methodically executing her former co-workers with shots to the head. After killing 6 people at the postal facility, San Marco turned the gun on herself, ending the deadliest workplace shooting by a woman in American history. Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes and formed crisis entry squads with SWAT teams from both the county and city of Santa Barbara. They advanced slowly through the maze of bins, counters, and corridors, not knowing if San Marco was still alive and waiting for them. They discovered the 3 bodies inside the building around 2 in the morning, 5 hours after the first emergency call. The final death toll reached 8 people when Charlotte Colton died from her injuries and Beverly Graham's body was discovered. Investigators determined that San Marco likely knew and chose her victims, though her exact motive remains unclear. The shooting marked the bloodiest incident at a postal installation in nearly 20 years and became synonymous with the phrase "going postal." San Marco's rampage highlighted the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and workplace grievances that spiral completely out of control. Brenda Ann Spencer was born on April 3, 1962, in San Diego, California, just 400 feet away from Grover Cleveland Elementary School. This 16-year-old redhead lived in absolute squalor with her alcoholic father Wallace Spencer, sleeping on a mattress in the living room surrounded by empty beer and liquor bottles. Her parents had separated, leaving Brenda with a man who was both physically and verbally abusive. The house where they lived was described as filthy and unkempt, a perfect breeding ground for the tragedy that would unfold. As a child, Brenda suffered a head injury from a bicycle accident that caused permanent damage to one of her temporal lobes, likely contributing to her increasingly erratic behavior. Despite showing talent in photography and even winning a local Humane Society photography contest, Spencer was a poor student who frequently fell asleep in class and had serious truancy issues. She developed an inexplicable hatred of police officers and spent time wandering the neighborhood killing birds with a BB gun. At age 15, she was arrested for shooting out school windows with her air rifle and for burglary. Her probation officer recommended hospitalization for depression, but Wallace Spencer refused to give permission. Instead, for Christmas in 1978, this brilliant father gave his troubled daughter a Ruger 10-22 semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle, a rifle scope, and a 500-round brick of ammunition. Spencer later revealed the devastating impact of this gift, saying she had asked for a radio but got a gun instead, making her feel like her father wanted her to kill herself. The morning of Monday, January 29, 1979, started like any other day at Grover Cleveland Elementary School. Children were gathering outside the gates waiting for 53-year-old Principal Burton Ragg to open them when Spencer positioned herself at her bedroom window with the rifle. She began her attack by targeting 9-year-old Cam Miller first, specifically because he was wearing blue, which she later said was her favorite color. The boy was shot in the back but survived. Principal Ragg and teacher Darrell Barnes rushed to help the wounded children when Spencer shot and killed Ragg as he tried to assist them. 56-year-old custodian Mike Sucher became her second victim when he attempted to pull a student to safety. 28-year-old police officer Robert Robb responded to the emergency call and was shot in the neck as he arrived on the scene. Police quickly moved a garbage truck in front of the school entrance to block Spencer's line of fire, preventing further casualties. After firing 36 rounds, Spencer barricaded herself inside her house for several hours while police surrounded the building. During this standoff, a reporter from the Evening Tribune randomly called phone numbers in the neighborhood and reached Spencer directly. When asked why she had committed the shooting, Spencer gave her now infamous response that would echo through history and inspire a hit song. She told the reporter she shot at the school children and adults because she didn't like Mondays and it livened up the day. She also told police negotiators that the children and adults were easy targets and threatened to come out shooting. The siege continued for hours until negotiators reportedly promised Spencer a Burger King meal if she surrendered peacefully. She finally emerged from the house and was taken into custody without further incident. During the standoff, Spencer had also revealed disturbing details about her drug and alcohol use that day, claiming she had taken downers, smoked marijuana, and drunk beer and whiskey before the shooting. Bob Geldof, lead singer of the Boomtown Rats, was at a Georgia State University campus radio station when he read a telex report about Spencer's attack. Her chilling explanation caught his attention, and he quickly wrote the opening line about a silicon chip inside her head switching to overload. The song I Don't Like Mondays became a #1 hit in the United Kingdom and 30 other countries, making Spencer internationally famous. Geldof later expressed regret about writing the song because he felt it made Spencer famous for her crime. Spencer was charged as an adult and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and assault with a deadly weapon. On April 4, 1980, just one day after her 18th birthday, she was sentenced to concurrent terms of 25 years to life in prison. This case is widely recognized as the first modern high-profile school shooting in American history, marking a tragic turning point that would inspire decades of similar attacks. During her 2001 parole hearing, Spencer made explosive allegations against her father, claiming he had drunkenly subjected her to beatings and sexual abuse throughout her childhood. Wallace Spencer denied these accusations, but they added another layer to understanding the circumstances that led to the tragedy. Spencer also expressed remorse at this hearing, saying she felt partially responsible for every school shooting that came after hers because others might have gotten the idea from what she did. Spencer has been denied parole multiple times in 1993, 2001, 2005, 2009, and 2022. She remains imprisoned at the California Institution for Women in Chino and won't be eligible for parole again until 2028. Her case continues to serve as a stark reminder of how childhood trauma, mental health issues, and easy access to firearms can combine with devastating consequences. Tashfeen Malik was born on July 13, 1986, in the small Pakistani town of Kara-Lal-Ezan, about 280 miles southwest of Islamabad. Her family was wealthy and politically influential in the area, owning large amounts of land. When Tashfeen was just 4 years old, her father Gulzar Malik, an engineer, moved the family to Saudi Arabia where they'd spend most of her childhood. Gulzar was known for building a mosque in his neighborhood and helping the poor, but he was also an ultra-conservative Salafist Sunni Muslim who held extremely strong anti-Shia views that would deeply influence his daughter's worldview. Growing up in Saudi Arabia's strict religious environment, Malik was immersed in Wahhabi Islam from an early age. In 2007, she returned to Pakistan to study pharmacology at Bahauddin Zakaria University in Multan, graduating in 2012 with excellent academic performance. Friends described her as brilliant and studious, though she wasn't known to have any particular religious or political affiliations during her university years. However, that would change dramatically when she began attending Al-Huda International Seminary, a controversial women-only Islamic academy that promotes an extremely conservative interpretation of the Quran. Malik enrolled in Al-Huda's 18-month Quranic studies course on April 17, 2013, and this is where experts believe her radicalization process accelerated. The school, founded in 1994 by Farhat Hashmi, teaches what critics call a judgmental and anti-Western interpretation of Islam that could encourage violence against non-believers. According to Pakistani scholar Faiza Mushtaq, Al-Huda classes teach urban, educated, upper-middle-class women a very conservative interpretation of Islam that makes them judgmental about others around them. The school has branches in the United States and Canada, and several women who studied there have attempted to join ISIS in Syria. After completing nearly a year at Al-Huda, Malik left the program on May 3, 2014, telling administrators she was leaving to get married. This is when she connected with Syed Rizwan Farouk through either an online dating website or possibly during the Hajj pilgrimage. Farouk took a 9-day trip to Saudi Arabia in July 2014 and returned to the United States with Malik using a K-1 fiancé visa. Despite undergoing extensive screening by 5 different government agencies, having her fingerprints checked against 2 databases, and being interviewed at the U.S. Embassy in Pakistan, Malik's radicalization went completely undetected. FBI Director James Comey later revealed that she was already radicalized before she ever applied for the visa. Malik and Farouk were married in August 2014 in Riverside County, California, and seemed to live a normal life. They had a 6-month-old daughter together and lived in a townhouse in Redlands with Farouk's mother. Neighbors described them as quiet and unremarkable, never suspecting the deadly plot they were planning. Behind closed doors, however, the couple was preparing for jihad, stockpiling weapons and explosives while discussing their extremist beliefs. They practiced shooting at local gun ranges and studied bomb-making techniques online. On the morning of December 2, 2015, Malik began searching social media for materials related to ISIS, preparing for what would become the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. Farouk attended his workplace holiday party at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, where he worked as a health inspector. Around 10 in the morning, reports indicate he got into an argument with a coworker and left the party angrily. Some investigators believe Malik's anger over her husband having to attend Christmas festivities may have triggered their decision to attack that day. Between 10 and 11 that morning, Farouk returned to the party with Malik, both dressed in tactical gear and armed with 4 guns, 12 pipe bombs, and 4,500 rounds of ammunition. At exactly 10:58, they entered the conference room where about 80 people were celebrating and began their methodical massacre. The couple fired more than 75 rounds in just a few minutes, targeting their victims execution style. Witnesses described a horrific scene with bodies everywhere and a river of blood flowing from the conference room onto the sidewalk. At 11:14 in the morning, just 16 minutes after the shooting began, Malik posted a message on Facebook pledging allegiance to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The post read, "We pledge allegiance to Khalifa Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi al-Quraishi." This was the first time a terrorist attack in America had been linked to ISIS through social media in real time, making the attack even more chilling. The couple then fled the scene in a black SUV, leaving behind their 6-month-old daughter with Farouk's mother. Police arrived within minutes and began evacuating victims while searching for the attackers. The manhunt lasted several hours until officers spotted the couple's black Ford Expedition around 3:15 that afternoon. A high-speed chase ensued through residential neighborhoods in San Bernardino, ending in a dramatic shootout that lasted several minutes. Both Malik and Farouk were killed in the gunfight, with Malik's body being pulled from the bullet-riddled SUV. One police officer was wounded but survived. The final death toll reached 14 people killed and 22 wounded, making it the deadliest terrorist attack in the United States since 9/11. The victims ranged in age from 26 to 60 and included county health department employees, environmental specialists, and a student intern. Many were immigrants themselves, including people from Iran, Mexico, the Philippines, and Ethiopia, making the attack particularly tragic given that Malik was also an immigrant who had been welcomed into American society. The investigation revealed that Malik and Farouk had been planning attacks for years, with evidence of previous plots dating back to 2011 and 2012. They had considered targeting a college or freeway during rush hour but ultimately chose Farouk's workplace because he knew the layout and security procedures. The case highlighted major flaws in the visa screening process and raised serious questions about how someone so radicalized could enter the United States undetected. Before moving forward, quick question. Are you the type of person who watches true crime content alone, or do you share these wild stories with friends? Drop a comment below and let me know which case has shocked you the most so far. Also, do not forget to subscribe. Now, let's get back to our countdown because the next case involves a method of killing that's absolutely diabolical. Naseem Najafi Agdam was born on April 15, 1979, in Urmia, Iran, and immigrated to the United States in her teens with her family, eventually settling in Southern California. By her late 30s, she'd become an eccentric but passionate vegan activist and bodybuilder who went by the name Green Naseem on social media. Agdam had developed a unique online presence that made her relatively famous among Iranian YouTubers and Instagram influencers, creating content in multiple languages including Farsi, Turkish, and English. Her videos ranged from animal rights advocacy to bizarre exercise demonstrations, and she'd often appear in colorful, revealing outfits that grabbed attention for all the wrong reasons. Agdam's online persona was built around promoting veganism and animal rights, describing herself as a Persian female bodybuilder and animal rights activist who promoted healthy and humane living. She'd created 4 YouTube channels and amassed thousands of subscribers across various platforms, posting everything from workout videos to passionate speeches about animal cruelty. One of her most well-known videos showed her wearing a revealing purple dress while complaining about YouTube's discrimination and filtering practices. She also posted exercise footage, dancing videos, and gruesome clips highlighting animal mistreatment to support her activism. Her content creation became a full-time job that she took extremely seriously, but YouTube's changing policies began destroying her livelihood. In early 2018, YouTube implemented new monetization requirements that creators needed 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time within the past year to earn advertising revenue. This replaced the previous threshold of 10,000 lifetime views, effectively cutting off income for smaller creators. Although Agdam's main English channel had more than 5,000 subscribers, many of her videos were demonetized under the new policy, and she claimed YouTube was deliberately filtering her channels to prevent them from getting views. The breaking point came when Agdam discovered she'd earned only 10 cents from YouTube for 300,000 views across her channels in 1 month. She became convinced that YouTube was part of some larger conspiracy to suppress independent creators, particularly those promoting alternative lifestyles like veganism. On her personal website, she wrote lengthy screeds claiming that YouTube and other platforms only allowed certain channels to grow, hiding the truth and manipulating people for profit. She also criticized YouTube for imposing age restrictions on some of her workout videos, which she believed was designed to reduce her viewership and discourage her from creating new content. By March 2018, Agdam's mental state had deteriorated significantly. Her family noticed she'd become increasingly agitated about YouTube's treatment of her videos, and on March 31st, she disappeared from her grandmother's house in San Diego where she'd been living. Her father Ismail contacted police to report her missing, explaining that she'd been upset about YouTube suppressing her videos and might be headed toward their headquarters. Early on the morning of April 3rd, Mountain View police found Agdam sleeping in her car in a parking lot about 30 miles from YouTube's San Bruno campus. During a 20-minute interview with officers around 1:38 in the morning, Agdam appeared calm and cooperative. She told police she was having family problems and had left home, but never mentioned YouTube or expressed any anger toward the company. The officers had no indication she posed a threat to herself or others, and they allowed her to leave after the brief conversation. What they didn't know was that Agdam's father had specifically warned them about her anger toward YouTube, but this crucial information apparently wasn't relayed to the officers who found her. After the police encounter, Agdam drove to a gun range near YouTube's headquarters where she practiced shooting with a Smith & Wesson 9mm semi-automatic pistol she'd legally purchased. Security footage shows her spending time at the range, methodically preparing for what she was planning to do next. Around noon on April 3rd, She drove to YouTube's sprawling campus in San Bruno and parked in an exterior parking garage. The 39-year-old woman then walked through the garage toward an outdoor patio area where employees were eating lunch. At exactly 12:46 in the afternoon, Agdam opened fire on the crowded patio, targeting people she didn't know personally. She fired 20 rounds, emptying one magazine before reloading and continuing her assault. 3 people were wounded in the attack, including a 36-year-old man who was shot in the chest and critically injured, a 27-year-old woman shot in the hand and leg, and a 25-year-old woman who injured her ankle while fleeing the scene. Witnesses described seeing Agdam walking calmly through the area, methodically shooting at anyone in her path. The shooting created chaos as hundreds of YouTube employees fled the building through emergency exits while others barricaded themselves in offices and conference rooms. Police arrived within minutes and found Agdam's body in the courtyard where she'd shot herself in the chest with her own weapon. A coroner's report later confirmed she died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound and found no evidence of drugs or alcohol in her system. She was just 2 days away from what would have been her 39th birthday. The attack marked the first mass shooting at a major tech company headquarters and highlighted the growing tensions between content creators and the platforms they depend on for income. While many other YouTubers had complained about demonetization and policy changes, none had ever resorted to violence. YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki later acknowledged that the company needed to do better at communicating with creators about policy changes and providing support for those affected by demonetization. The incident also raised questions about how someone with such obvious grievances against a company could slip through the cracks of multiple warning systems and carry out such a devastating attack. Natalie Lynn Rupno was born on November 7, 2009, in Madison, Wisconsin, into what would become one of the most chaotic family situations imaginable. Her parents, Jeffrey and Melissa Rupno, had an absolutely wild relationship that involved marrying and divorcing each other 3 separate times throughout her short life. They first married in 2011, 2 years after Natalie was born, then divorced in 2014 when she was just 5 years old. The couple remarried again in 2017, only to divorce for a second time in 2020. Then they married for the 3rd time, but separated and divorced once more just months later, with a court actually ordering them not to marry again. This constant cycle of marriage, divorce, and custody battles completely destroyed Natalie's sense of stability. She was caught in the middle of their turbulent relationship, constantly moving between homes with an alternating custody schedule that had her spending 2 days with her father, 2 days with her mother, and so on. Court records show she primarily lived with her mother after the first divorce, then mainly with her father after the 3rd divorce. By July 2022, Natalie had been enrolled in therapy specifically to help guide decisions about which parent she'd spend weekends with, but the damage was already done. The therapy sessions revealed disturbing details about Natalie's mental state and home environment. She'd been threatening to kill herself and engaging in self-harm by cutting herself to the point where her father had to lock up all the knives in his house. Her therapist told her mother that Natalie was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from her parents' constant divorces and separations. One of her friends told police that Jeffrey Rupno was frequently verbally aggressive with his daughter and that Natalie had described him as a drinker who would often abuse her emotionally. Jeffrey Rupno told investigators he decided to connect with his troubled daughter through firearms after taking her shooting on a friend's land about 2 years before the attack. She enjoyed it so much that he came to see guns as their bonding activity, but he was shocked at how quickly her interest in firearms snowballed into something much more serious. In August 2024, just months before the shooting, Jeffrey brought Natalie to join a gun club where they practiced regularly. He even posted on Facebook about how they'd joined the club that spring and had been loving every second of it. The warning signs became impossible to ignore in the weeks leading up to the attack. Jeffrey kept Natalie's pistols in a gun safe but told her the access code was his social security number entered backward, essentially giving her unlimited access to deadly weapons. 10 days before the school shooting, he texted a friend saying that Natalie would shoot him if he left the gun safe open, which should have been a massive red flag about her mental state and potential for violence. The day before the attack, he took the Sig Sauer pistol out of the safe so she could clean it, but he got distracted and wasn't sure if he put the weapon back in the safe or properly locked it. On December 16, 2024, 15-year-old Natalie arrived late to Abundant Life Christian School after taking an Uber at 10:39 in the morning. She'd slept in that day and seemed perfectly normal to anyone watching her movements around campus. After stopping by the main office, she went to her locker and spent time in the bathroom before heading to a mixed-grade study hall classroom where students of different ages worked together. At exactly 10:54, just 15 minutes after arriving, Natalie pulled out a 9mm Glock handgun and began systematically shooting her classmates and teachers. The attack lasted only minutes but caused devastating damage. Natalie fired 21 rounds, killing 42-year-old substitute teacher Erin Michelle West from DeForest and 14-year-old freshman student Ruby Patricia Vergara. 6 other people were wounded, with 2 remaining in critical condition for weeks after the attack. A second-grade teacher called 911 at 10:57, and first responders arrived to find Natalie dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head at 11:05. She'd been carrying a second weapon, a .22 caliber Sig Sauer pistol, along with multiple loaded magazines and 50 rounds of 9mm ammunition in a bag. After Natalie killed herself, one of the injured students in the room quickly grabbed the gun she'd used and hid it in a nearby desk drawer, showing incredible courage during the chaos. Police recovered 20 shell casings from the study hall and discovered that Natalie had worn a black t-shirt emblazoned with a bullseye during the attack, suggesting she'd planned this assault carefully. The investigation revealed she'd been communicating with 20-year-old Alexander Charles Pfaffendorf from California, who was plotting his own mass shooting targeting a government building with explosives and firearms. When police searched Natalie's home after the shooting, they found notebooks and a lengthy document she'd titled War Against Humanity, where she described people as filth and said she was living in a population of scum. Using racial slurs, she wrote that some groups of people deserve to be dead, revealing the depth of her hatred and radicalization. Madison Police Chief John Patterson described the materials as disturbing and alarming, saying they would have led any average person to conclude that violence was imminent. The case became even more complex when investigators discovered Natalie had been in an online relationship with a 22-year-old man in Florida who'd been arrested for planning his own mass shooting. She'd once told this man she wanted to stage an attack on a black church, showing how her violent fantasies had been developing for months or possibly years. The FBI detained Pfaffendorf and obtained an emergency protective order to remove his firearms after he admitted to agents that he'd been plotting with Natalie and had told her he would arm himself with explosives and a gun to target a government building. Nearly 5 months after the shooting, prosecutors charged Jeffrey Rupno with 2 counts of intentionally giving a dangerous weapon to a minor and 1 count of contributing to the delinquency of a child, charges that carry a combined maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. A court commissioner ruled there was enough evidence to order him to stand trial, rejecting defense arguments that he didn't know his daughter was considering violence and didn't physically hand her the weapons at school. This case represents one of the rare instances where a parent has been held criminally responsible for their child's access to firearms used in a mass shooting. Jane Toppin started her murderous career in 1885 when she began training as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital on Mount Auburn Street in Massachusetts. Behind her cheerful nickname Jolly Jane lurked one of America's most twisted killers who turned healing into a deadly art form. Born Honora Kelly around 1854 to an alcoholic father known as Kelly the Crack, she'd grown up in Boston's female asylum before being taken in as an indentured servant by Widow and Toppin. But it wasn't until she got her hands on medical supplies that her true nature emerged in the most horrifying way possible. Toppin's killing methods were absolutely diabolical and revealed a mind that took sadistic pleasure in human suffering. She used 2 primary drugs that created the perfect storm of torment for her victims: morphine and atropine. Morphine causes pupils to contract, breathing to slow, and eventually leads to coma, while atropine has the complete opposite effect, dilating pupils and causing giddy exuberance that ends in death by painful spasms. Mixing these two drugs together, she could alternately sink her victims into a stupor and then rouse them to heights of delirium, essentially playing with them like a cat torturing a mouse until she was ready to deliver the final dose. Her experiments on helpless patients were conducted under the guise of scientific research, but they were really elaborate torture sessions designed for her own twisted gratification. Toppin would alter prescribed dosages to see what happened to patients' nervous systems, making up fake charts to hide her activities from other medical staff. She'd spend considerable time alone with patients, medicating them to drift in and out of consciousness while she observed their suffering with fascination. One surviving patient described how Toppin climbed into bed with her and pressed against her, stroking her hair and caressing her through her bedclothes while trying to give her what would have been a final sip of poisoned mineral water. The sexual component of her crimes made Toppin particularly disturbing even by serial killer standards. She admitted that the killings brought her sexual gratification and that she specifically liked to be alone with victims as they died. According to contemporary newspaper reports, she would gleefully fondle patients, stare into their eyes as if trying to see the inner workings of their souls, and do everything possible to intensify their agony. Then when death finally came, she would become herself again, returning to the cheerful Jolly Jane persona that made everyone trust her completely. Toppin's hospital career took her from Cambridge to Massachusetts General Hospital in 1889, where she claimed several more victims before being fired the following year for administering opiates recklessly. She briefly returned to Cambridge but was soon dismissed again for the same behavior. This pattern of dismissal for drug-related infractions should have been a massive red flag, but instead it just pushed her into private nursing where she had even less supervision and unlimited access to vulnerable patients in their own homes. By 1895, Toppin had moved beyond hospital patients and began systematically murdering people in her personal life. She started with her former landlords Israel and Lovey Dunham, poisoning them both after sudden illnesses that nobody suspected were actually carefully planned murders. In 1899, she killed her foster sister Elizabeth Toppin Brigham during what seemed like an innocent visit to the coast. Elizabeth's husband became suspicious of Jane's behavior and removed her from the premises, likely saving his own life in the process. The killing spree that finally brought Toppin down occurred in 1901 when she moved in with the elderly Alden Davis and his family in Cataumet on Cape Cod. She was supposedly there to care for Davis after the death of his wife Mattie, whom Toppin had already secretly murdered. Within just 6 weeks, she systematically eliminated the entire family, killing Davis himself along with his daughters Mary Minnie Gibbs and Genevieve Gordon. 4 deaths in such a short period finally raised enough suspicion that relatives demanded an autopsy. When toxicology results revealed morphine in one daughter's system, authorities ordered the exhumation of all the bodies and launched a full investigation. Toppin was arrested in October 1901, and during her interrogation, she made chilling statements that revealed the depth of her depravity. She told investigators that her ambition was to have killed more people, specifically more helpless people, than any man or woman who ever lived. When asked if she felt any guilt about her crimes, she answered that she had thought it all over and could not detect the slightest bit of sorrow over what she had done. During her confession, Toppin admitted to using combinations of morphine, atropine, and strychnine to kill most of her victims. This combination of a sedative painkiller, a stimulant, and an outright poison allowed her to manipulate and lengthen patients' deaths, bringing them very close to death, then reviving them several times before they ultimately died. She claimed to have murdered 31 people total, though some estimates put her victim count as high as 100 deaths across her years in various hospitals and private nursing positions. Her trial in Barnstable in 1902 centered on the question of sanity, with alienists, the era psychiatrists, testifying that she was insane while prosecutors argued she knew exactly what she was doing. Ironically, Toppin herself insisted she was sane, telling examiners she understood right from wrong and had simply killed for the fun of it. The jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity, and she was committed to Taunton State Hospital where she spent the remaining 36 years of her life. Even at the mental hospital, Toppin's twisted nature continued to manifest in disturbing ways. She initially refused to eat any food that hospital staff prepared, insisting it was poisoned, showing a paranoid awareness of her own methods. As she grew older, she would whisper to staff members, asking them to get some morphine so they could go out in the ward and have a lot of fun watching patients die. Jane Toppin died in 1938 of apparent old age, having achieved her goal of becoming one of the most prolific female serial killers in American history. Belle Gunness wasn't just any ordinary farm woman. She was a 5'8", 200-pound Norwegian immigrant who turned her Indiana farm into America's deadliest killing field. Born Brynhild Paulsdatter Storseth in 1859, Belle had mastered the art of murder by combining old-world cunning with modern American opportunity. Her killing methods were as calculated as they were brutal, involving a deadly combination of poison, blunt force trauma, and surgical dismemberment that would make even seasoned investigators lose their lunch. Belle's preferred method of dispatch was strychnine, a rat poison that causes one of the most agonizing deaths imaginable. Victims who ingested this nightmare substance would experience violent muscle spasms, convulsions, and complete respiratory failure while remaining fully conscious throughout the ordeal. She'd often slip the poison into coffee or food, watching her victims suffer through what appeared to be natural seizures before they finally died in excruciating pain. Autopsies later revealed lethal doses of both strychnine and arsenic in Andrew Helgelian's stomach contents, proving Belle wasn't content with just one poison when she could use two. When poison alone wasn't enough to finish the job, Belle would resort to more direct methods of violence. She kept a variety of blunt instruments around the farm, including axes, hammers, and meat cleavers that she'd use to bash in skulls or deliver fatal blows to the head. Most of the skulls found on her property showed massive gashes and signs of blunt force trauma, indicating she'd beaten her victims to death with savage brutality. Some historians believe she'd chloroform victims first to subdue them, then finish them off with whatever weapon was handy, making the entire process more manageable for a woman of her size. The dismemberment process was where Belle's farm background really showed its usefulness. She'd butcher human bodies exactly like she'd process hogs, using the same tools and techniques she'd learned from years of slaughtering livestock. Bodies were systematically decapitated at the neck, arms were removed at the shoulders, and legs were severed at the knees before being wrapped in burlap sacks and buried around the property. She'd douse the remains in quicklime to speed decomposition and reduce the stench, showing a methodical approach that suggested years of practice and refinement. Belle's relationship with her farmhand Ray Lamphere added another disturbing dimension to her killing operation. Lamphere was completely infatuated with Belle and served as both lover and accomplice, helping her dig graves and dispose of bodies in exchange for her occasional affections. He'd later confessed to his attorney that Belle had killed over 40 men during their time together, with him personally witnessing at least one death and helping bury 3 victims. The dynamic between them was twisted even by serial killer standards, with Belle manipulating Ray's obsession to turn him into an unwilling participant in her crimes. The most chilling aspect of Belle's operation was how she'd separate victims from their money before killing them. She'd convince suitors to sell everything they owned and bring cash to her farm, sometimes as much as $3,000 per victim, which equals about $100,000 in today's money. Once the cash was in her hands, the men were as good as dead. She'd often spend days or even weeks building trust and intimacy before administering the fatal dose, making the betrayal even more complete and devastating. Her husband Peter Gunness became one of her earliest victims, dying under suspicious circumstances in December 1902 when a meat grinder allegedly fell from a shelf and fractured his skull. Belle claimed it was an accident, but the medical examiner couldn't find any burn marks from the pot of scalding water she claimed had also fallen on Peter. The wound pattern suggested he'd been struck multiple times with a heavy object, but Belle's tearful performance convinced authorities to rule it accidental death, allowing her to collect his life insurance and continue her deadly career. Belle's Lonely Hearts advertisements were masterpieces of manipulation that targeted Norwegian immigrants across the Midwest. Her ads would read things like, "Comely widow who owns a large farm in first-class condition desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman." She'd correspond with multiple men simultaneously, building emotional connections through carefully crafted love letters that promised both romance and financial security. One letter to Andrew Helgelian read, "My heart beats in wild rapture for you. Sell everything you own and come here. We will live so happy together." The discovery of Belle's mass grave in May 1908 revealed the full scope of her butchery. When Asle Helgelian arrived looking for his missing brother Andrew, he found burlap sacks containing torsos, hands, arms hacked from shoulders, and masses of human bone wrapped in loose flesh that dripped like jelly. The methodical way bodies had been processed showed this wasn't the work of an amateur, but someone who'd perfected their technique through years of practice. Each victim had been killed, dismembered, and buried using identical methods, suggesting a ritualistic approach to murder. Belle's final act was perhaps her most diabolical. In April 1908, sensing that authorities were closing in, she staged her own death by burning down her farmhouse with 4 bodies in the basement. 3 were identified as her children, while the 4th was a headless woman initially assumed to be Belle herself. However, the body was 5 inches shorter and 50 pounds lighter than Belle's known measurements, leading many to believe she'd killed an unknown woman as a decoy and escaped with a fortune stolen from her victims. Ray Lamphere was convicted of arson but died in prison before revealing whether Belle had truly perished or successfully vanished into American folklore, leaving behind one of the most horrific crime scenes in the nation's history. As we close this haunting chapter on America's most notorious female mass shooters and killers, one thing becomes crystal clear. These women didn't emerge from a vacuum. From Amy Bishop's academic rage to Jennifer San Marco's postal fury, from Brenda Spencer's Monday morning hatred to the methodical brutality of Jane Toppin and Belle Gunness, each case reveals the devastating potential that emerges when personal trauma, mental illness, and access to weapons collide. These women, representing less than 5% of all mass killers, shattered every stereotype about female violence and left scars on American society that continue to bleed today. Their stories serve as chilling reminders that evil doesn't discriminate by gender, that the most dangerous predators often hide behind disarming smiles, and that recognizing warning signs could be the difference between preventing tragedy and becoming another headline in America's endless cycle of violence. And that wraps up our terrifying journey through America's most notorious female mass shooters. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who appreciates deep. Do me a favor. Subscribe right now if you haven't already, because I've got a whole series planned covering female serial killers that will absolutely blow your mind. Hit that notification bell too, because YouTube's algorithm is weird and you might miss these videos otherwise.